Hi everybody, I'm here with you today with my very good friend Lauren Martyr, who is a colleague of mine. She works in the ICU. She is a wonderful nurse practitioner, and today she's going to share with you her experience in her transition into the role of NP.
Hi.
Welcome everybody. If we haven't met yet, my name is Bree. I'm a nurse practitioner. I make content for nurses, NPs, and students. Welcome. So Lauren has such a unique experience in that she started in the FNP program, and you worked in the hospital before you went back to school for your master's program. So what made you decide as a hospital nurse to pursue the FNP route instead of the acute care route?
So honestly, I went to Mercer for my family practice. At the time, I was researching schools to do. Number one, I wanted a fast program.
Sure.
So Mercer's was an advanced program. I did it in 4 semesters, which you have to be prepared for that.
Yeah.
And that is not an easy do. But I was working outpatient or working in the hospital at the time as an RN, looking at grad schools. Not only did I want something fast, but I was actually under the assumption at that time that family practice was just such general education, right? It's from birth to death. I got a pediatric portion. I got a women's health portion, adolescent and geriatric, adult and geriatric. So it was broad education, which I thought would make me very marketable.
Sure.
And at the time when I was looking, acute care really wasn't as big of a thing. It felt like I was thinking the most education I got through lifespan would have made me more marketable.
Sure.
But what it did was lock me out of a job market.
Right. Well, you probably went back to school right about the time that LACE consensus model sort of came out and everything sort of became role delineated, and there has been some crossover, I would say, in the last 5 or 10 years about people who work inpatient or who want to work inpatient and what degree they actually need for that. Where we work in Georgia, you have to have your acute care. I mean, everywhere that I know, you have to have your acute care to round on patients in the hospital. So I do personally know a lot of friends who did the exact same thing Lauren did. Went back to school for the FNP program with lots of jobs being available for FNPs, very marketable, and then come to find out that they could not work in the hospital and that they maybe weren't as fulfilled doing the primary care or urgent care or family practice type of work. So many people did like you did, where you did the FNP route, worked for a couple of years, and then decided it was time to go back for your Postmasters.
So I did start my journey as family practice with Mercer University. That was a wonderful program. Outpatient management was just not for me. There was hurdles in every practice, inpatient, outpatient, and I think you just have to choose your hurdle.
Sure.
I think being a nurse and being in the hospital and having multiple resources at your fingertips, like RT comes when you call, and there's physical therapy, and there's occupational therapy, and there's diabetes education, all of those ancillary departments that help run inpatient. You really miss that outpatient when patients have needs, and there's a lag time between when they get those other
so you have like
services.
A lot of follow-up stuff.
Yes.
So like you'll order labs and you got to follow up on it and call your patients back. So there's sort of a carryover kind of thing.
And even when you need to consult somebody else or send them to another specialty, it's not like a quick phone call like, hey, can you drop by and see this patient? It's a quick, in the hospital it's a little bit quicker. It can take several weeks, and sometimes these patients don't have several weeks. And so it felt really frustrating to me not to be able to immediately help somebody.
I see that. What did you, and you worked mostly in urgent care, right?
I did. I worked in 2 different urgent care sites. The first one was very much just like the sick visit, injury, splinting, suturing, simple things like that. But the second urgent care setting I was at was very closely tied to adult, like primary care.
I see.
So I did see a lot of mix of sick day visits and then follow-ups, and some just like diabetes follow-ups and all the primary care things that you would follow as a primary care provider.
He works alongside me in the ICU currently. Lauren, tell me, what do you like about your specialty?
This time around, I really enjoy working with the critically ill population. So that was an ICU, multiple drips, very, multiple comorbidities, a lot of things going on. That kind of stimulates the brain and keeps everything really active, and that's my favorite part.
Definitely does that. It's got to be kind of quick on your feet, don't you?
Yes.
Okay, so your current specialty in critical care, your acute care, what don't you like about that?
So with that critically ill patient comes that the tragedy side of it.
Oh, yes.
So I think we've all felt that over the last 18 months. I think
Sure.
it's hit a little hard in comparison to when I started, because I started with the group prior pandemic. But boy, the last 18 months, those kind of tragic stories hit a little bit hard.
Yeah, they are very emotional. That is true. You got to have a little bit of stamina, particularly if you're in acute care and you work in an ICU setting. People aren't usually doing well.
It's a little bit of a thick skin growing situation.
Absolutely. Whereas I guess in primary care,
You really form a relationship with your patients, or you can. There's, some patients are healthy enough, you're just going to see them once a year. That's
Right.
not much of a relationship, but the ones that have multiple comorbidities that are coming back every 3 months for A1C and blood pressure checks and so forth and so on, or lab draws for therapeutic, medication management, but and you get to follow up a little bit closely with them. Then before you know it, you're starting to see the mom and then their daughter as they age. And so it can be a generational relationship. Some of the providers in my outpatient practice, have been there for 40 years and have taken care of multiple family members. So that is something, if you really need that patient relationship development and that type of kind of relationship.
deeper relationship, because our relationship is much shorter, obviously.
Yeah, with critical care, it's not like we've known these families, was just spur of the moment.
Sure. Yeah, it definitely appeals to a certain personality type. So you got to kind of know your inklings of what you are adept at handling emotionally. I mean, what would fulfill your need to care for others. So I can see that. So tell me a little bit about your Postmasters, where you did that and your experience with that.
So I completed a Postmasters certificate program at Brenau University. It was 2 semesters. Like I said, I wanted something that I knew I was going to have to redo clinical. That's the other thing I think people have to realize, every time we did several hundred hours in FNP, and I did an additional almost 500 hours in Postmasters, so it's still clinical hours on top of the academic portion. So it was 2 semesters. It was local. That was super important to me, as we've got children and family balance, and I still had to work full time.
And you worked,
I worked full time.
Like many of us do, but
doing that program. So it was. It fit my needs.
When you started working as an ICU provider, did you feel like you could just come straight out of school and go to work? Did you feel prepared? Do you feel like Brenau did a decent job preparing you for what you were going to encounter?
So I feel like the main educator of the program, she also was actively working as a nurse practitioner in a critical care setting. So I think she did a really good job at marrying the book world
with the reality
of what you're doing.
That's a huge value.
It is. So I really appreciated that. Of course, they tied in a review course with we did Barkley Review, which is a wonderful review course. I did that for FNP. I did that for Acute Care as well. So that was good. So it was board preparation. It was real life application, and then the academic gold standard learning.
I went to Emory and I felt as prepared as you can be, but there's only so much you can be prepared. It's just like when you finish your RN degree, you get out of school and you have no idea what you're doing when you first start. I think everybody experiences that to some degree. How would you say your onboarding was?
Inpatient or outpatient onboarding, because I'll start there because that's what I did first. The first place I worked at was 3 weeks with an MD.
Yeah.
And then I was by myself at a clinic with MD on call. I could always video chat and telehealth. and supervising MD in, but it was very, very fast.
Yeah.
Onboarding, outpatient. Inpatient was wonderful onboarding. I know we didn't have the same experience, but it helped because I did clinicals
Right.
where we work, and
Yeah.
I think you speak all the time about making sure your clinical is your job interview. It's your working job interview, and I really keep that in my mind when I was in any type of clinical. I knew I wanted to do critical care when I was doing this program. And when I showed up with my clinicals, I mean, by the end of it, I was taking the whole patient load.
So you were pretty much, that was your onboarding.
That was onboarding.
She did it right. When you first started working, how long do you think it was until you felt competent?
Outpatient was pretty fast because I did a lot of clinical rotations where I ended up working at one point. And that clinic was very fast paced, and I worked with a very well-rounded provider that used to be a hospitalist where we work many moons ago. And so she really, she had high expectations for sure. So that pace was pretty fast, so I felt really good there.
You felt good there?
Yeah. Inpatient.
I always say I felt at 6 months I stopped driving home white knuckling it, thinking I had killed someone. And at a year I felt like okay, I can take a deep breath. And at 2 years I felt like I can pretty much handle anything that comes my way, for the most part.
Okay, yeah, I think I remember that. So 3 months in, you're like, what did I forget? Maybe you have racing thoughts at night, not quite sleeping all the way. Might be staying a little bit late just to triple check everything, because you surely don't want to have to call your attending at the night and be like, I forgot to order.
Yeah.
6 months in, I think I was starting to feel better. I think the biggest thing that I remember talking to one of our attendings who's been with us for a very, very long time. And I told him, I was like, I'm just scared of really messing up. I'm like, and he was like, well, you're a human.
Yeah.
And it's going to happen. And he was like, have a healthy dose of fear. So I've kept that healthy dose of fear that keeps you on your toes, where you go systematically and you triple check. But I think it took me a solid year to feel like when I leave work, I can leave work.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it just takes time.
Yeah.
Certainly the more broad your scope is, I feel like if you're a hospitalist, if you're a critical care, where you have to know a little bit about a lot of things, it's very overwhelming. If you have a specialty, you can kind of focus on your organ system, and it comes a little bit quicker. But for kind of what we do, it just takes time. What is your schedule like?
Inpatient, I do 312s. I did like one gig of Monday through Friday for like a wee bit. That is not for me.
When you did urgent care, what was your schedule like there?
The first round I did my first urgent care where I was more independent. I did 4 10s. And then the second kind of urgent care that was more associated with primary care, that sick clinic did 12. So I did 3 12s there.
Do you feel like you have autonomy in your practice?
Yes. I actually have felt very autonomous on both aspects, on outpatient and inpatient. When you work at a very high volume outpatient clinic, there's a expectation that you can see and guidelines and can see patients every 10 to 15 minutes. They're in a slot for that much for a reason.
Yeah.
And you have to be efficient. And so
I feel like that would be so intimidating. Just like that stresses me out. But like at least with what we do, we kind of have a little time. We have a little bit of time to get stuff done. Think.
So there was autonomy there because the volume, you've got to be ready to go. And there's very much, I feel like we have autonomy with our group in critical care. I understand not everybody's as fortunate as we are, but I feel like we also have really good collaborative relationships with our attendings. Like it's very academic discussions, I'm seeing this, studies are saying, and you can kind of, there's a dialogue.
Sure.
I feel like the majority of our group really respects everybody's kind of viewpoint and ways to manage patients.
How much do you think, Lauren and I are very similar, so I already know the answer to these questions, but how much do you think having autonomy as a nurse practitioner comes into play with your job satisfaction?
I really think it really depends on the person. There's some practices we see where their APP or PA is very much tied to the attending for the whole shift. And some people love that. They love
That's true. That's
having that close, relationship and that tie, and that way you feel like you're always backed up and whatever. I personally am very grateful for our team when they're like, hey, go see somebody at the ER, tell me what you think. Like, that feels good. That feels like
kind of empowering. Like you're using what you've been taught and your skill set to the full scope of your practice.
Yeah, I would, but also out of respect for my attendings, I would never I would never haul off and just like do something without discussing it. It's a two-way street.
Sure.
And I think when you show that you are engaged and collaborative, I think it becomes a very mutual relationship. Yeah. And that does feel that's very fulfilling.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Do you think that the market is saturated?
Hot topic.
I'm known for approaching those.
So I do.
Yeah.
I feel like not only is it, a good school background, a great, clinical experience. Again, your clinical could be a working job interview, but I really think you have to network, and it comes down to who you know on several nurse practitioner feeds on Facebook and social media. And I can't tell you how many times I see people that are moving in their state. They're like, "Does anybody know?"
Yeah,
and
I know.
so
It's really disheartening.
I do
it's probably the number one question I get asked is advice on job acquisition right now. But I always like to ask this question because you get mixed reviews depending on who you talk to. So it's very interesting, and it varies across the country. Obviously, the region that you work in, the specialty you work in. For what we do in critical care, where we live, it's very saturated. Okay, let's talk money. Everybody wants to know money. Did you earn more as a bedside nurse than you did as an NP, as a new NP?
Yes, I did. So I was a little bit on the specialist spectrum of bedside nursing. I was every week in contract, so that, is a differential and critical care float.
And you were float, and you'd been doing it for a lot of years, so yeah.
That adds up when you're at the bedside. And when I took my first NP job outpatient, it was like,
ouch!
It was like almost $10,000 less a year.
Gosh.
It was
painful.
Painful, but at that time, it took me 6 months to find my first job outpatient after graduating and passing boards. So I was just kind of like, I gotta do it. I can do it for a year and get that kind of new grad.
Yep, get that off that's absolutely right.
But it was a humbling year. So it wasn't until my second year when I transitioned to the other group that I made the same.
Oh gosh.
As my RN job. And then it wasn't until I transitioned to acute care where my financial situation increased by a good amount.
Yeah, it just takes time, but and I know there are a lot of people, you have to balance all the things, right? What you want in the ideal job versus ideal work schedule versus pay, and it's a lot of balls you got to juggle, and you got to figure out what fit works for you, and just realize that your first job is not your permanent job. It's not what you start out making is not what you'll end up making, and you just got to kind of, to use that cliche, pay your dues in some aspects. Now, it's not the same for everyone. I mean, I have said openly I've tripled my salary, but I went from working part-time to full-time, so there was that piece of it. And if you've not been a nurse for very long and you go from, outpatient nursing or, non-specialty nursing and you haven't been doing it long and you go to something like inpatient, you may take a significant hike. It depends on where you started and where you land. So there's so many variables that you really can't generalize that statement.
Yeah.
Your motivation for going back to school should not be based on money because of those variables.
Yeah, it can be different across the board, outpatient, inpatient, specialty, non-specialty, and when you have to think about the whole contract too, when you're talking, money home is money home, but though when I took a lesser salary the first time, they covered all my healthcare costs. Like they paid my healthcare premium.
Yeah.
And then, there was a bonus structure that you could, work on that tier. So it's a whole package. It ends up being a review of the whole package.
Yeah, totally. So what's next for you?
I am definitely still going to continue in taking care of critically ill patients. That is definitely my calling. It's where I'm supposed to be. I am going to expand my horizons for the first time as acute care and transition into a part-time role with a trauma service at a very busy level 1 trauma center in our city. So it's going to be a roller coaster.
Yeah.
I'm nervous. I'm excited. I have not done anything surgical or trauma related, so it's new ground.
Big change for you.
But it's still, these patients are still critical. It's just that other slice of critically ill patients that I've never, got to experience. So I'm excited for new opportunities. That healthy bit of fear is a bit bigger now.
Right.
So I'll let you know how long I white knuckle at home.
Right. Well, I think, this job is all about, as you said, expanding your horizons and continuing to learn and continuing to grow. Medicine is so vast. There's so many things we can do even within our specialties. So I applaud you. I think it's amazing. I can't wait to see what you learn.
Very marketable.
I love that goal. We all want that, right?
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and telling everybody about this. I know many people are in the same boat that you've been in, where to start, how to start, where to go, where it ends up. So I appreciate you sharing your knowledge with all the people.
Thank you. I hope this helps.
Where you went to school for that.
Why?